Hi, my name is Jillian Maxcy-Brown. I'm a graduate research assistant at the University of Alabama. Today I'm going to share with you a project that we're working on with the University of South Alabama to develop a how-to guide for wastewater management of rural and underserved communities in the Black Belt region of Alabama. This is designed to be a resource guide for local stakeholders, but it also can be contextualized to other parts of the country. In the U.S., wastewater is managed using either centralized network systems or on-site and decentralized systems. Roughly 75% of the population are connected to these centralized systems. This is what you think about as your typical municipal sewer network, where the buildings and houses are connected to underground pipes that lead to a centralized wastewater treatment plant. The remaining 25% of the population that are not connected to those sewer systems, they use on-site septic tank systems, which you can see here has a tank and a drain field, or there's decentralized systems where it's a group of homes but a much smaller scale than what the centralized networks are. So a decentralized system may be a cluster of homes, it may be like a neighborhood, a street, anything that much smaller than a whole city. The on-site and decentralized systems are being used in about 30% of new buildings that are being installed in the US. With your conventional septic tank system, the wastewater leaves the home, enters the septic tank where the solids settle out, and then the liquids are discharged into a drain field or a leach field. There's gravel at the bottom where microbes are attached for some wastewater treatment, and then the rest of the treatment occurs in the soil matrix before the water enters the groundwater table. In the U.S., if a home has a sewer connection, the home is given a sewer bill. If the household is able to afford that sewer bill, and that is how they have access to wastewater management. If the household is not able to afford that bill, sometimes there's alternative arrangements that can be available based on the utility to help subsidize that bill. And if not, then the household may resort to relying on unsafe practices for managing their wastewater. If the house is not connected to a sewer bill, but the soil geological climate conditions are compatible with a conventional septic system, then the household is responsible for installing one of those systems. That costs typically a couple $1,000s to install, in addition to a few $100s every few years for maintenance. The household is responsible for all of the costs, not just the capital costs, but also the ongoing expenses. And if they can't afford that, then they will possibly resort to having unsafely managed sanitation. If the property that the house is located isn't compatible with a conventional septic system, then an advanced system will need to be installed. These typically cost $5,000 or more, sometimes up to $20,000 to $30,000, depending on how the site conditions are for a specific home. And if a household is able to afford that system, then they install that. And if not, then you end up back in the box where there's households relying on unsafely managed sanitation access. The Black Belt region of Alabama has approximately 550,000 residents. It's named for the rich, dark topsoil that in many places is underlain by an impermeable shrink swell clay known as a vertisol. There's also shallow impermeable chalks in this area. These soil conditions prevent the use of your conventional septic tank system in many of the areas. These counties, though, have a 25 to 40% poverty rate, so this poverty limits the residents' ability to have access to affordable alternatives for their wastewater treatment. Here's a soil map for Alabama. The pink area is where the shrink swell clay, the vertisols, is primarily present, but soil maps are just a general estimation. There will still be this vertisol clay in other areas, even if it's not the dominant soil for that area. Some of the residents that don't have access to sewer service and are living in poverty on unsuitable soil, some of them have resorted to using straight pipes, which are raw sewage discharges. The straight pipes discharge the raw wastewater onto their lawn or a nearby trench or forested area. The main difference between a straight pipe and a failing septic tank system is a straight pipe moves the wastewater away from the property versus a failing septic system. The wastewater is typically just standing really close to the house. There are some areas that have community lines that connect multiple households to a large centralized straight pipe. There have been surveys of straight pipe use in 3 different counties. Bibb County is not within the traditionally defined Black Belt counties, but in 2005, 15% of the homes surveyed did have straight pipe systems there, and 35% of them had septic tank and drain fields that had hydraulic failure. In Wilcox County, a 2016 survey found that only 7% of the homes had permitted on-site wastewater treatment systems. There were 60% with straight pipes and 33% that didn't have a permitted system, but they also didn't have a visible straight pipe. Hale County was also surveyed in 2016. 35% of the homes had permitted wastewater treatment systems, and 6% used straight pipes, with 59% that didn't have a permitted system but didn't necessarily have a visible straight pipe. One of my previous projects was looking at straight pipe use throughout the U.S. That study found that there were straight pipes documented to being used in 15 different states throughout the country. So this isn't just a problem in Alabama, it's something that's existing in communities throughout our country. These wastewater problems have been documented in recent academic publications, as well as some reports and news articles from across the country. There was also recently a visit from EPA to look at the systems that were failing in the Alabama Black Belt. And as many of you may be aware, there's some really monumental funding that has become available in the last couple of weeks to start addressing these wastewater challenges. There's a few different reasons why these wastewater challenges have gone unaddressed for so long. Historically, infrastructure investments have decreased. The federal government put forth a lot of funding to put in infrastructure for wastewater decades ago, with the intention that states and local governments would then pick up the slack and continue investing in order to keep the infrastructure up and running properly. But the state and local governments haven't necessarily done that to the degree that it needs to be done. Data access is really limited to know about where straight pipes exist. You have to do site-by-site surveys and go to each house individually and then backtrack and compare those households' wastewater use to what is permitted and what's documented at the county level. A lot of the documentation is still on paper, so it's quite a time-consuming process to decide if a system is permitted and if it's functioning properly. The information about wastewater management and treatment options that are available, it's scattered among numerous resources, and many of these resources are written in a way that somebody needs to have a decent amount of experience with wastewater and know some of the lingo and the technicalities behind different aspects of managing wastewater. So the resources aren't necessarily the most accessible to local stakeholders like homeowners or county officials, who are really important in making sure that we mobilize solutions to start addressing these wastewater problems. For this resource guide, we're consolidating information from a variety of different sources, and we're writing in a way that anyone who picks up the resource document will be able to understand it, whether they have an experience with wastewater industry or if they've only vaguely ever heard of wastewater, or maybe even never heard of the concept of wastewater. The resource guide begins with an executive summary that will help outline and guide the audience based on whether they're an engineer or if it's a homeowner or a county official, help them understand the best way to use this resource guide for their needs. We also discuss the importance of proper wastewater management, some of the different treatment methods that are out there, collection system options as well, what the management options are for those systems, as well as some of the ordinances and legal considerations for wastewater systems. We also identified numerous funding sources that could be used to pay for these systems, and some ideas for community education and outreach to get other people involved in these projects. And finally, we included a list of contact information, so if they have further questions or need some help with these wastewater projects, they have some idea of who they could contact for more information. It's really important that every resident has access to properly treated and managed wastewater. These households that have failing septic tank systems and straight pipes, they have raw sewage that's just sitting on their lawns. Their dogs on hot Alabama summer days may go and lay in the pools of raw sewage and then come inside and trek those bacteria and viruses and pathogens into the house. If a kid is out there playing, their toy may fall into the puddle. And if they pick up the toy, then they have these disease-causing things on their hands, and then if they use their hands to eat or anything, you have a lot of different exposure pathways that you wouldn't normally have and that are very serious and could cause significant sickness. Also, wastewater is really important to economic development. A business can't move into an area unless they know they have reliable wastewater. Can you imagine going to the store and needing to use the bathroom and there's not a bathroom that you can use? That's just not something that is acceptable in today's society. There are three main ways that wastewater can be collected: using traditional municipal systems, on-site individual systems, or decentralized clustered systems. In the Black Belt region, there are 72 centralized wastewater treatment plants. 76% of these are for municipalities, 10% are for K through 12 schools, and then 14% are for other areas such as state parks or industrial, or they're for private businesses. Some of the systems can be extended, but it's costly to extend a municipal sewer, about $1 million per mile. And the homeowners typically have to pay the connection fee, which can be anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000. The next option is to install on-site individual systems. You can use your conventional septic system or advanced systems. One of these is a mound septic tank system where they artificially add sand or other soil media above the natural grade so that there's additional soil for the wastewater to go through and have treatment before it enters the groundwater table. As I mentioned earlier, the conventional one's about $3,000 for this area, and the advanced can be anywhere from $5,000 all the way up to $20,000 to $30,000, which many of the residents that don't have access to sewer live in mobile homes that are worth less than what some of these systems would end up costing to install. Another option is to install decentralized cluster systems that connect multiple houses to one treatment system. The type of system that we primarily are focusing on is a septic tank effluent pump or pressure, also known as STEP, or if it's by gravity, it's a STEG. These have a septic tank at the house that collects the solids, and only the liquids are transported to a centralized treatment unit. The treatment unit can then discharge into a nearby sewer system or into a water body or into the soil subsurface. The liquids can either be pumped to the treatment system, that's how you get a STEP system, or they can be gravity fed, which would be a STEG. You can use a trencher to dig a 2 to 3 foot hole into the ground for the pipes. The pipes are typically only a couple inches in diameter, whereas your conventional sewer system, those pipes are significantly larger and are almost all gravity fed. So those cost a whole lot more to install than what these types of pipes cost. As I mentioned, each home has a septic tank for the solids. Since there's only the liquid moving to the treatment unit, there's no minimum velocity, so it's very flexible for the diameter of pipe that you use compared to what a conventional sewer network. They have strict requirements about what velocities must be maintained, and that's through the steepness or the slope of the pipe. For STEP or STEG systems, it's typically a 2 to 3 inch pipe that's only about 2 to 3 feet deep below ground. You may have to account for freezing, but in Alabama we won't have to do that. The smaller diameter pipes allow for there not to be the same deep excavation, so it only costs about $35,000 per mile to install these. If you have a lot of different homes in an interesting geographical situation, you could have STEP and STEG systems depending on what each house needs. There's a variety of different options for how to manage these wastewater collection and treatment units. It's ultimately most important to establish a responsible management entity. That can be a local government, a community organization, or a private company. That responsible management entity is responsible for the system maintenance and repairs, as well as any regulatory compliance requirements, and if there's customer billing to take care of. The resource guide also goes into ordinances and legal considerations, starting with an overview of the state regulations on wastewater treatment and management. some local ordinances for the Black Belt counties, and legal considerations for system ownership, permitting, and finally, what to do with the solids from the septic tanks, typically known as septage. Those solids will need to be disposed of, which is currently a pretty hot topic and needs to have a lot more research and discussion going into how do we safely manage those solids. This resource guide identifies more than 25 potential funding sources. The two really big ones currently are the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as ARPA. In Alabama, $5 million from ARPA have been authorized for wastewater projects. There's also the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which authorized $50 million of funding for each fiscal year from 2022 to 2026. It also says that eligible households can receive grants up to $15,000 for their wastewater treatment systems. The other identified funding sources come from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, ADEM, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, Rural Community Assistant Partnerships, also known as RCAP, and private corporations or foundations. For community education outreach, we recommend developing a website where contact information for local stakeholders is easily accessible and information about wastewater management and treatment for a specific community is there, as well as information from the resource guide. We've created a general website for the Black Belt region, but certain communities could create websites specific to their local residents. We also recommend the development of brochures and fridge magnets that could be mailed directly to residents, and the organization of local town hall meetings and webinars to allow for in-person options, as well as an option for people who live further away from the town and or have mobility issues and aren't necessarily able to come to the physical in-person meeting. Also, if the person doesn't necessarily have reliable access to internet, they may prefer an in-person option. So having that flexibility will be important to making sure that everyone in the community is involved. We've also created some school curriculum that's available in the resource guide, and we're working on developing informational videos to help people understand what the options are for the Black Belt region with regards to wastewater treatment and what are some of the solutions that are currently being mobilized. The next steps for this document include finalizing the draft, and then we will distribute it to our community partners in order to gather feedback from them, and then it will be distributed to local stakeholders. And although it's focused on the Black Belt region, it will serve as an example guide for other states throughout the country. This resource guide is the first of its kind, so it's going to be really important for addressing the wastewater challenges throughout the country. I would like to acknowledge that this project is funded by the U.S. EPA Gulf of Mexico for reinventing wastewater management in the Black Belt region of Alabama. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you found this video informative.